The emptiness in my stomach was no longer a warning. It was a state, a weight that remained, settled inside, as if the body had given up measuring its own lack. There were days when the hunger hurt, bit, demanded. Then it learned to be quiet. It didn't disappear. It just lost its sound. It became something old, settled, like the cold that no longer surprised. The stomach didn't complain. What complained was the weakness, discreet, spread through the muscles, in the way of holding the head, in the inevitable slowness of the eyes. They remained standing because falling was a conspicuous gesture. It wasn't pride, it was caution. The rigid posture served to hide the trembling, to hide how light their bodies felt. Shoulders raised, hands controlled, minimal movement. The discipline of appearing whole when everything inside was already in pieces. The body learned to restrain itself as if restraint were shelter. Any gesture made outwardly carried risk, not because someone had said it at that moment, but because it had already been said before, in other ways. An outstretched hand could become a motive. A glance could become a motive. A word could become a motive. Humiliation was associated with the simple act of existing in public. The body knew. The body always knew first. That's why even desiring was dangerous. Even thinking about desiring was dangerous. There was a kind of silence that didn't mean calm. It was a heavy, accumulated silence, as if the air were filled with things no one dared name. They heard footsteps before they saw them. The sound of boots on the hard floor echoed through the hallway and into their ribs. Their breathing became shallower, not by choice, but out of habit. A habit that formed when the worst could happen without warning, without haste, without drama. It just happened. And that was the point. It seemed inevitable. Not a specific event, not a single act that could be predicted, but the certainty that at some point, something would come. Something external. Something that wouldn't ask permission. Something that wouldn't explain itself. The body prepared for it, as if it were preparing for the morning chill. It doesn't ask if it will come. It simply adjusts. Hunger, then, was no longer just physical. It was a hunger to go unnoticed, to pass by without friction, to survive without provoking. The mind still tried to organize thoughts, but the body already lived in an older calculation: to remain whole, to remain quiet, to remain invisible. Time ran strangely within them. Sometimes it seemed too long. Sometimes it seemed to end too soon. And in the midst of it all, they held on to what remained of themselves with an unseen firmness, a silent firmness, made more of fear than courage. Nothing was happening, and that was no relief. Nothing happened, and the body continued to wait. Because in war, even waiting has a sound, and the sound of waiting was what was most tiring. Fear didn't arrive as a thought. It arrived before that. A brief tightness in the chest, an involuntary adjustment in posture, extra care when moving the feet. There was no need to explain. There was no need to warn. The body recognized the territory, recognized the pattern. The mere idea of capture already came accompanied by punishment, as if the two things were the same word said in different ways. They didn't need to remember a specific episode. Memory didn't work that way. It was a scattered, bodily memory, made of repetitions, little, always little. Little food, little space, little rest, everything lacking as a rule. The body learned not to expect more than that. It learned that wanting was a miscalculation, that expecting something beyond the minimum was exposing itself. That's why desire became suspect. Not a big desire, the kind you talk about, but the smallest one. One more sip, a slightly larger bite, one more second of rest. The fear wasn't of asking, it was of feeling the urge, because the urge, when it appeared, came with the memory that it was almost never satisfied. And when it wasn't, it exacted its price. Internal discipline wasn't taught through words. No one needed to order them to hide their needs. They learned by observing. They learned by seeing what happened to those who couldn't hide it. Their bodies then began to anticipate, to restrain gestures, to soften expressions, to maintain a neutral face even when everything inside demanded something else. It was a silent, harsh, exhausting discipline, enduring one's own lack as if it didn't exist, swallowing hunger along with fear, feigning normalcy in the face of scarcity, as if it were simply the natural order of things. It wasn't resignation. It was survival adapted to the environment. Fear no longer needed words because it was always present. It neither rose nor fell. It simply remained. A constant level of alert, low enough to allow one to continue, high enough to never relax. Sleep didn't turn it off. Waking up already brought it with it. It was like carrying a weight that wouldn't let go because without it, something worse could happen. Nothing there was improvised, not even the fear. It had been learned, refined, incorporated. It had become part of the body in the same way as hunger. And just like hunger, it had stopped screaming. It remained quiet, attentive, waiting. Time didn't move forward as it should there. It accumulated. Each minute seemed to occupy physical space, pressing down on the body from within. Waiting wasn't a pause between events. It was a prolonged, almost aggressive state. Nothing changed, and precisely because of that, everything seemed poised to change at any instant. They remained motionless not by direct order, but because their bodies already knew that the wrong movement would draw attention. The waiting demanded constant preparation. It wasn't rest. It was readiness. Their muscles tensed, even when nothing was happening. Their entire bodies were prepared for abrupt withdrawal, as if they needed to disappear in seconds, even without knowing where to. Her eyes never stopped, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. Every movement around her was registered. A different sound, a step that didn't follow the expected rhythm, a silence that was too long. The excessive attention was more tiring than the physical effort. It was a weariness that didn't come from doing, but from containing, from watching, from not making mistakes. Waiting was worse because it left room for imagination. Obedience, when it came, at least gave form to the fear. Waiting didn't. It stretched everything. It stretched thought. It stretched breathing. It stretched time until it almost broke. The body didn't know whether to shrink or stand firm. There was no right gesture while nothing was said. The constant feeling was that any reaction could be misinterpreted. A movement that was too small could seem like a challenge. A movement that was too quick could seem like guilt. Even the face needed to be controlled. Neither too attentive nor too distant. A fragile balance, difficult to maintain for long. The body began to ache, not from exertion, but from forced immobility. The legs complained silently. The back stiffened. The cold found spaces where it hadn't before. Still no one moved, because to move without permission was to act prematurely, and acting prematurely almost never ended well. Nothing was said, and that was the hardest part. The absence of words kept everything in suspense. There was no confirmation, no clear threat, no direction. Just time standing still before something unknown. The waiting became a kind of continuous test, where there was no right answer, only the attempt not to fail. And so, second after second, they remained there, not obeying, not resisting, just waiting. Because, in that place, waiting was a form of survival, even when it hurt more than any order ever had. The order came without weight in its voice. Short, simple, The kind that, elsewhere, wouldn't require any thought. But there, simple words were never just words. They carried invisible layers, accumulated from everything that had happened before, from everything that usually happened afterward. The command sounded too ordinary to be safe. That was what was strange. Nothing in the tone indicated a direct threat, and precisely for that reason the body didn't know how to react. Experience had taught that danger didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it came disguised as normality. Sometimes it came calmly. No one moved immediately, not out of defiance, out of calculation. The difficulty wasn't understanding what had been said. It was believing that it could actually be done, that there wasn't something hidden in the next gesture, that it wasn't a silent test, one of those that punish those who respond too quickly. Within them, necessity propelled them forward. The body recognized the opportunity, however small, but caution pulled them back. A quiet, internal, heavy conflict. Moving forward could mean making a mistake. Staying back could mean losing. There was no comfortable choice there, only possible choices. Obedience, when it began, came slowly. A measured step, a restrained gesture, as if each movement needed to be confirmed by the body itself before it happened. The fear of making a mistake wasn't in the act itself, but in what might come after it. Making a mistake, there was never a small one. It was never corrected with words. The eyes searched for signs that didn't come. No immediate reaction, no change in the atmosphere. The silence continued. This was not reassuring. Silence rarely brought reassurance. It only amplified the feeling that something was still to happen. The body moved forward, but did not surrender to the gesture. There was a sustained tension, as if it were necessary to be ready to stop everything at any second. The learned discipline did not allow for relaxation. Even when obeying, it was necessary to maintain emotional distance from the act. Not to trust too much. Not to believe too much. Nothing there seemed natural. Not the order, not the answer. Everything was permeated by a story that didn't need to be told to be felt. A story made of unexpected punishments and permissions that were never freely given. Therefore, every step carried doubt. Every second was too heavy to be just a second. The order had been simple, but simplicity in that place was always suspicious. There was something there that didn't fit. It wasn't big, it wasn't announced, but it was out of place in a way that was hard to ignore. The body perceived it before the mind. A minimal delay in reaction, like when something breaks the expected rhythm. The logic learned from war demanded scarcity, harshness, restraint. This obeyed none of those rules. The presence of that something caused a different kind of silence, not the tense silence of waiting, nor the heavy silence of immediate fear. It was a silence of estrangement, the kind of silence that arises when reality doesn't confirm what has been repeatedly taught. The eyes took a while to accept it. The body took even longer. It didn't fit with captivity. It didn't fit with the setting. It didn't fit with the history they carried within their bodies. The unexpected abundance came without words, without demands. It was simply there, and that, in itself, seemed like a miscalculation. The mind searched for explanations. None seemed certain. Distrust quickly set in. A gesture without expectation was rarely truly free. Experience had shown that. There was always a consequence. There was always a price. The body remained rigid, even in the face of what seemed to offer relief. It wasn't refusal. It was protection. Accepting too quickly could be dangerous. Thoughts jostled silently. Where is the trap? When will the next order come? What hasn't been said yet? The mind searched for cracks, signs, any detail that would restore cruel coherence to that moment. Because coherence, even harsh coherence, was known. This was not. Nothing happened in response to the hesitation. No correction. no change of tone, no visible pressure. Time passed, and yet the gesture remained undemanding. This did not reassure. It increased the discomfort. The war had taught them to wait for the blow. Teaching them anything else seemed impossible. The body remained on alert, but something was beginning to give way. Not out of confidence, out of exhaustion. Maintaining absolute distrust also takes its toll. And at that moment, the cost of not reacting was beginning to equal the risk of reacting. The logic of war failed there, not with a bang, but with a detail too small to be ignored. Something that shouldn't have existed in that context did, and nobody explained why. The first contact was unplanned. There was no clear decision, nor organized internal consent. The body went first. A short, almost automatic movement, as if responding to something too ancient to pass through reason. The fingers touched first, then the hands. Only then did the awareness of what was happening come. The physical response was immediate and impossible to hide. A reflex, an involuntary adjustment of breathing. The stomach, which had remained quiet for so long, reacted with an embarrassing intensity. It wasn't pleasure, it was recognition. The body acknowledging something it had lacked for too long. Shame followed soon after. Not public shame, but that intimate, silent shame that arises when one realizes one's vulnerability before those who should be enemies. Feeling relief there seemed wrong, as if the body had betrayed an unwritten rule, as if accepting that would erase everything that had been endured before. The mind tried to keep up, but it was lagging behind. Swallowing was difficult, not because of the physical effort, but because of the weight of the gesture. Each movement of the throat carried guilt. Guilt for needing it. Guilt for accepting it. Guilt for feeling something good in a place where nothing should be good. The body insisted. The mind resisted. Neither completely won. There was an excessive care taken not to appear too grateful, not to show too much, not to transform that moment into something bigger than it was, because making it too big would be dangerous. Still, the awareness of how much they had been deprived imposed itself forcefully, not as an elaborate thought, but as a harsh, physical realization. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The body remembered the past and felt the present at the same time. The difference hurt. It hurt to realize how much scarcity had been normalized, how much scarcity had become a measure, how much that, so simple, now seemed excessive. Nothing was said. There were no suitable words. Silence returned to fill the space, but it wasn't the same silence as before. Something was permeating that moment, something that wouldn't easily dissipate. The body still reacted, even as the mind tried to regain control. War had taught us to fear. That moment taught something else, not as a lesson, not as a promise, simply as a fact, a small, silent fact, impossible to erase once experienced. Nothing visibly changed immediately afterward. The atmosphere remained the same. The sounds, the smells, the weight of the place. Yet, something was no longer exactly where it had always been. It wasn't hope. It wasn't trust. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible alteration in the way the other person came to exist in their minds. It wasn't about forgetting what that uniform represented, nor about erasing learned fear. The change was smaller, and for that very reason, more profound. A silent shift in perception. The uncomfortable realization that the figure ahead didn't entirely fit into the single idea of threat. This didn't make the world safer. It only made it more complex. The moment remained in the memory not as a clear scene, but as a sensation, a detail that insisted on returning when the body relaxed for a second. It came without explanations. It simply appeared, sometimes in silence, sometimes in the dark, sometimes much later, when there was nothing left in that place but the memory. Dignity wasn't restored through speeches or promises. It was touched lightly, without warning, almost by accident, and perhaps that's why it remained. Not as something fully recovered, but as proof that it hadn't been completely destroyed, even there, even in that way. They didn't talk about it amongst themselves. There weren't the right words. Talking might diminish it. It might transform the gesture into something it wasn't. So it remained hidden, the way important things sometimes do, without a defined form, without a conclusion. The captivity continued. The war continued. The fear continued. But that moment persisted, outside the normal order of events. A point off the line, a deviation too small to change everything, too big to be forgotten. Humanity appeared there without warning, without declared intention, without asking for recognition, and then it retreated, like almost everything else in that place. But it left a trace, not a trace that pointed the way, just one that reminded us that, even where nothing seemed to fit except violence, something still did, and this, without fanfare, remained. Some people move on, others stay a little longer. The stories continue here for those who choose to stay.